Dude, I told you I was gonna wear a light color. You're gonna wear something bright. So when I shut up.
You're on in 3.
This is so
2,
ridiculous.
1.
Hi, I'm Dan, and this is...
I can't. You're gonna go, man. Okay.
And this is where we're gonna put the news into context.
No.
Alright, so today we're going to talk about net neutrality and why it's important and why the government and a lot of big corporations are talking about big cable companies throttling and what that means.
There's a lot of misunderstanding about what throttling actually means and the practicality of it really affecting the consumer. People are under the impression that the cable companies can somehow profit by just completely cutting off certain transactions or certain browsers. But when you look at it, the only major case of this is from 2006 to 2010. Comcast began slowing the speeds of things like BitTorrent, which is commonly used for illegal downloads. So obviously it's in their best interest to limit stuff like this. But what you're going to see is, as a company, they still have to compete with providers like Verizon. So it's not in their best interest to give you slow internet. A lot of people don't understand what throttling actually is and how it comes into play with net neutrality. What the idea of any type of net neutrality is that all type of information on the internet, every file is equal and everything deserves the same download speed. And on paper that seems, yeah, it's fair, everything's equal. But in reality, when a consumer's paying for a certain type of service, like if I had a commercial Xfinity account and I was supplying my employees with the tools to browse the web, I would want priority to be on cloud-based email services rather than my coworker playing Sudoku on his laptop doing work.
Aren't they putting aren't they mixing television with like internet and all and putting it down like basically one pipe, and that's what's going to make things buffer and slow things down?
Well, what we see is net neutrality.
Like nothing's getting prioritized, right? Everything's like getting an equal share, I guess?
Yes, and the one thing that the FCC is extending is they're extending the Communications Act of 1933, mainly Section 706, basically puts the guidelines on telecommunications and censorship, and they're extending that to all forms of media, when normally this only applied to television. So you could see censorship all over the internet in places where before unimaginable.
Forbes.com just released an article yesterday, and this is talking about Tom Wheeler, who was the chairman of the FCC. And it says, quote, Chairman Tom Wheeler, who announced the order would not affect taxes and would protect both innovators and investors. As months pass, there are indeed plans underway to impose broadband taxes. So we're already seeing that in the coming months, the government's going to try imposing taxes. And I think that this is even going to open a way for the government to open up another agency, like the Department of Internet, something like that. And it's just going to grow government, really.
I mean, what did people expect? We saw people flocking to websites like YouTube and Tumblr and essentially begging their government to extend the rules on net neutrality.
But no one really knows all the facts. But you know what I mean? I feel like this is just like a marketing campaign for the government to have control. I mean, the government's out there claiming that big cable companies are going to block access to different sites, but when has that ever happened?
Well, I mean, it's not to say that doesn't happen.
But it never has.
Well,
it rarely has. You know what I mean? Like, the internet's already free, and the government is trying to say, okay, well, we need to take it over to make it more free. Which, I mean, it's confusing. Like, that's what, like, they're confusing people with this. And, you know, people are out there just saying whatever they hear, you know, big, you know, cable news pundits saying. But it's not really what's happening. And I think the most disturbing part of this is that in February, this was voted on by the FCC, and there were only 5 people who voted on it, and 3 of them said yes. So this law, like this overreaching law, is coming down by 3 people that were unelected.
Well, the one thing that some people probably don't understand is we've slowly been introducing this type of idea since 2004, and it's essentially the government putting a stranglehold onto your internet. And they did it in a manner where it was so extended and thorough that they essentially have total control of the internet now. And what you're going to see is people want their government to be a giant overreaching shield to protect them from the scary businesses, but in reality it's in the business's best interest to provide a sound service to their customers so they can compete with their
And when
competitors.
has the government taking over the internet ever worked?
It's
like
like
North Korea.
Yeah, people are begging their government to protect them from what they think is hurting them, but in reality, the government just sneaking their hand in their back pocket, taking out their wallet, and just seeing all the ways they can help themselves.
Well, Georgetown University actually did a poll on how this would affect businesses and investors, and it said that investors are going to be more likely to avoid putting their money into risky, higher tax and more highly regulated, costlier ventures. What the government is essentially trying to do is they're claiming that there's only a few big cable providers, and that's what the problem is. But there's always going to be those few, even if the government regulates it even more. The problem is regulation, and a small business isn't going to be able to thrive if it's highly regulated, and they have all these fees and permits to pay for. So the problem is that it's too regulated, and the government's going to regulate it even more, and it's only going to help out Verizon, AT&T, Time Warner, and places like that.
Exactly. Now, every cable company you see in play right now has essentially been around for a long time and extensions of cable companies. And the reason why is there's so much overhead to start a cable company. And now it's just even harder for a new company to get into this business. And that's the death of capitalism.
Yeah.
If a company can't build itself up to compete with the big company, that's essentially a monopoly in the big hands and in the hands of our government. So,
and you're probably wondering how the government is able to do this now and not, a couple years ago. They're doing it through reclassifying the internet as to what it means, and they're trying to reclassify the internet as a utility. So they're essentially saying that it's something that every single household needs to basically survive, like electricity or water, which are both regulated. But electricity and water aren't they're not ever changing like the internet is. So that's what's different about this.
now they did the same thing with telephone lines, but obviously that's slightly more important. And what they're doing is they're calling it a public good, which is just a fancy way of saying let's extend the public sector.
Thanks for watching, for those of you who did, and remember to subscribe, follow us on social media, and keep watching, because you guys are really feeling what we do, and we're trying to grow ourselves as a media outlet.